It is one of the peculiar characteristics of my friend Hercule Poirot that he approaches even the smallest details of daily life with the precision of a master craftsman. On the foggy November afternoon when this extraordinary case began, I found him in his flat at Whitehaven Mansions, engaged in what appeared to be mortal combat with a perfectly innocent necktie. "You are punctual as always, Hastings," he observed, without turning from his mirror. "The military training, it leaves its mark, n'est-ce pas?" "Indeed," I replied, settling into my familiar chair, "though I confess I'm curious about this evening's engagement you mentioned. Something about dinner." Poirot's reflection caught my eye in the glass, and I saw that familiar gleam that indicated his little gray cells were already at work. He gestured toward his writing desk, where two items lay side by side, an elegant cream-colored invitation and a second letter on cheaper paper. "We are invited to dine at Wren House in Belgrave Square," he explained, finally achieving satisfaction with his tie. "The residence of Sir Ambrose Wren, the collector. You recall him? The gentleman with a passion for 18th century snuff boxes who recently married the charming Mrs. Lydia Wren. The widow with the musical interests," I nodded. "But what of the second letter?" Poirot handed me the cheaper missive with theatrical care. "Observe, mon ami, this arrived by the afternoon post." The handwriting was crude, attempting formality but betraying an underlying nervousness. The message was brief and chilling. "Monsieur Poirot, there will be a dinner at Wren House this evening, and a guest will not eat. Please attend if you wish to ensure it is not you." "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "This is clearly a threat. We must inform the police immediately, or at the very least warn our hosts." "Ah, but consider," Poirot said, settling into his chair with the satisfaction of a man who has found an interesting puzzle. "Mrs. Wren has invited me specifically to honor Mr. Felix Darnley, her husband's generous benefactor. The timing, it is most curious, no? And observe the phrasing, 'will not eat.' In English, this suggests not merely lack of appetite, but perhaps prevention. You suspect the anonymous writer intends harm to this Mr. Darnley? Or to someone else entirely? The mind that writes such a letter, Hastings, it enjoys the dramatic gesture. But drama and truth, they are not always the same thing." Despite my protests, Poirot insisted we attend the dinner. To refuse would be to miss an opportunity to prevent whatever mischief is planned. Besides, he added with a slight smile, "my curiosity, it is thoroughly aroused." The gathering of suspects. Wren House presented an imposing facade against the November evening, its white stone frontage gleaming under the gas lamps. We were received by Graves, the butler, a man whose very name seemed chosen for the evening's ominous undertones, and shown immediately to the drawing room. Mrs. Lydia Wren greeted us with the studied graciousness of a woman still growing accustomed to her elevated social position. She was handsome rather than beautiful, perhaps 38 years of age, adorned with diamonds that seemed to announce her new status rather than compliment her appearance. "Monsieur Poirot, how delighted I am that you could come," she said, her smile perhaps a touch too bright. "Tonight is quite special. We are honoring Mr. Darnley's extraordinary generosity to my Bloomsbury Children's Festival. Such philanthropy must be properly acknowledged." The other guests were already assembled, creating a tableau that would soon prove far more significant than any of us imagined. Sir Ambrose Wren, our host, possessed the refined features of a scholar and the delicate hands of a collector, constantly moving as if cradling invisible treasures. Miss Vera Linton, the celebrated singer, brought warmth to the room with her vivacious presence and knowing eye. Dr. Harold Peveril stood nearby, his cautious manner and measured speech marking him as a man who chose his words as carefully as his patience. Miss Beatrice Foyle, Mrs. Wren's companion, observed the gathering with the neutral expression of one who knows all the household secrets but reveals none. Young Mr. Hugh Lessing, Sir Ambrose's nephew, possessed the restless energy of a man dissatisfied with his circumstances, while Mrs. Honoria Gale, the society columnist, took in every detail with the practiced eye of her profession. At the center of this gathering stood Mr. Felix Darnley himself, a man who seemed to embody the new wealth of our changing age. His confidence was absolute, his manner bordering on the theatrical, and his every gesture suggested a man accustomed to getting precisely what he wanted. "The famous Monsieur Poirot," Darnley said upon our introduction, his handshake firm and his smile sharp. "I've heard it said that meeting you is either a great honor or a terrible omen. I prefer to think it's the former." "Let us hope your optimism proves justified, monsieur," Poirot replied with characteristic politeness. When dinner was announced, we processed to the dining room with appropriate ceremony. The table was set with military precision, crystal and silver gleaming under the chandelier's light. I noticed Poirot's quick glance at the place cards, and something in his expression suggested he had observed a detail of significance. Mr. Darnley took his place of honor at Mrs. Wren's right hand, accepting the tribute as his due. The conversation flowed pleasantly enough, though I detected undercurrents of tension, the sort that often accompanies gatherings where money and social position are at stake. It was as the soup course was being served that the evening took its fatal turn. Darnley raised his glass of water. He had declined wine, and seemed about to drink when something made him pause. He set the glass down and stared at its contents with an expression of puzzlement, then growing alarm. "I say," he began, but the words died in his throat. His hand flew to his chest, then to his lips, as if testing for sensation that was no longer there. The color drained from his face with startling rapidity. Mrs. Wren's cry of alarm was drowned by the crash of Darnley's chair as he collapsed, sliding from his seat to the carpet with the terrible finality of a man whose last breath had already left him. Dr. Peveril was at his side in an instant, but after a brief examination, he looked up with the grave expression I had seen too often during the war. "I'm afraid Mr. Darnley is dead." The silence that followed was broken only by Mrs. Wren's stifled sob and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Poirot, who had moved with his characteristic quiet efficiency, knelt beside the body without touching it, his keen eyes taking in every detail. "No one is to touch anything," he announced with quiet authority. "Dr. Peveril, if you would be so good as to ensure Mr. Darnley is not disturbed. Graves, please secure all entrances to this room." He straightened and surveyed the shocked faces around the table, his expression grave but alert. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have witnessed is not a natural death. Mr. Felix Darnley, your guest of honor, has been murdered, and the killer sits among us at this very table." The anonymous letter's prophecy had come to pass with terrible accuracy. A guest at Wren House had indeed failed to eat his dinner, and now Hercule Poirot faced one of his most challenging cases, a locked room mystery where every suspect had motive, means, and opportunity, and where the truth lay hidden beneath layers of social pretense and carefully guarded secrets. The transformation of the elegant dining room from a scene of hospitality to one of investigation occurred with the swift efficiency that always marked Hercule Poirot's involvement in matters of life and death. While the other guests remained frozen in shock, Poirot moved with purposeful calm, his keen eyes absorbing every detail of the scene before official interference could disturb the delicate evidence. "Graves," he commanded quietly, "you will telephone immediately for Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard. Tell him Hercule Poirot requests his presence at a matter of murder. Until he arrives, no one enters or leaves this room." Dr. Peveril, still kneeling beside Darnley's body, looked up with professional gravity. The symptoms suggest alkaloid poisoning, most likely strychnine given the rapid onset and muscular rigidity. Death would have occurred within minutes of contact with the toxin. "Contact," Poirot repeated thoughtfully, approaching Darnley's place setting with the delicate precision of a surgeon. "Not ingestion, mon ami. You are certain of this distinction?" The speed suggests absorption through mucous membranes rather than digestion. Peveril confirmed. The lips, perhaps, or precisely. Poirot bent close to examine the water glass without touching it. Observe, Hastings. The rim bears a faint residue, almost invisible, but present. Someone has coated this glass with a substance that would prove fatal upon contact with the lips. I peered over his shoulder and could just make out a slight dulling of the crystal surface. But surely the servants would have noticed such a thing when setting the table. But consider the timing. The glass was clean when placed, but doctored afterward. Poirot's gaze shifted to the place card beside the setting. And here we have our first significant clue. You see the faint water ring on the tablecloth? The glass has been moved. Only slightly, but moved nonetheless. Someone adjusted the seating arrangement after the table was laid. The interviews begin. Inspector Japp's arrival brought official weight to the proceedings, though he wisely deferred to Poirot's initial observations. Together, they established a systematic approach to questioning the assembled guests, using Sir Ambrose's study as an interview room while the dining room remained sealed. Mrs. Lydia Wren entered first, her composure admirable despite the circumstances. Her hands trembled slightly as she seated herself, but her voice remained steady. Mr. Darnley was indeed generous to my children's festival, she confirmed. £5,000 pledged, with promises of more if the work expanded beyond Bloomsbury. But she hesitated, color rising in her cheeks. He had begun to express interests beyond mere philanthropy. He suggested that a woman of my capabilities deserved more than the limited scope my current circumstances provided. Poirot's eyes sharpened. He made advances, madame. He made suggestions, she replied carefully, about opportunities that might arise for someone willing to embrace change. I made it clear that I was quite content with my present situation. And how did he receive this clarification? With the confidence of a man accustomed to eventual success in all his endeavors. When Sir Ambrose followed, his scholarly demeanor seemed ill-equipped for the brutal realities of murder investigation. His answers revealed a man who had perhaps paid insufficient attention to the undercurrents in his own household. Darnley struck me as presumptuous, he admitted. He examined my collections with the eye of an appraiser rather than an appreciator. He made several pointed comments about the monetary value of pieces that I consider priceless for their historical significance. He suggested you sell, Poirot inquired. He suggested I consider the practical applications of accumulated wealth, most inappropriate for a dinner guest. Young Hugh Lessing's interview revealed the bitter disappointment of thwarted ambition. He promised me a position in one of his companies, then withdrew the offer when he discovered my racing debts. Called me irresponsible and suggested I learn the value of money before expecting to handle other people's. Miss Vera Linton proved more forthcoming about Darnley's character. Felix was a collector of people as much as Sir Ambrose collects artifacts. He enjoyed having influence over those he considered talented but financially vulnerable. He had written me several letters that I found increasingly personal in nature. Compromising letters? Japp interjected. Letters that demonstrated his belief that financial support entitled him to personal consideration, she replied diplomatically. The pattern emerges. As the interviews continued, Poirot's little gray cells began to process the complex web of relationships and motivations. Each guest had revealed not merely motive, but a pattern of behavior from the deceased that suggested a man who used his wealth as a weapon of control and manipulation. Miss Beatrice Foyle, Mrs. Wren's companion, provided perhaps the most illuminating observation. Mr. Darnley arrived early this evening and spent considerable time examining the table settings. He seemed particularly interested in the place cards and asked several questions about the seating arrangements. Mrs. Honoria Gale, the society columnist, confirmed this unusual behavior. I observed him handling several of the place cards, though I assumed he was merely checking his own position. He seemed quite particular about where everyone was to sit. As the formal interviews concluded, Poirot sat in contemplative silence, his fingers steepled before him. The anonymous note that had brought him to Wren House now seemed less like a warning and more like a promise. Someone had planned this evening's events with meticulous care, using Darnley's own manipulative nature as the trap that would ultimately destroy him. "You see the pattern, Hastings?" Poirot asked quietly. "Our victim was a man who believed he could control others through their weaknesses. But someone at this table proved immune to his methods and decided to employ their own." This concludes Section 2 of The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. The investigation has revealed multiple motives and a clear method, while Poirot's systematic approach has uncovered the first crucial evidence that will lead to the killer's identity. The grey London dawn that followed the tragedy at Wren House seemed to cast everything in shades of uncertainty. I found Poirot in his sitting room, meticulously arranging his notes from the previous evening's interviews into neat piles, each representing a different aspect of our investigation. His breakfast lay untouched, a sure sign that his little grey cells were working at their highest capacity. "Ah, Hastings," he greeted me without looking up from his papers. "You arrive at the precise moment when the official investigation threatens to conclude with what Inspector Japp would call admirable efficiency. Surely the case cannot be solved so quickly." I settled into my chair, accepting the coffee Georges silently provided. The complexities seemed far from resolved when we departed last evening. "Indeed, mon ami, but our good inspector believes he has discovered evidence that will satisfy both the authorities and the public's desire for swift justice." Poirot's tone carried that particular note of skepticism I had learned to recognize as a warning that all was not as it appeared. Japp's triumphant return. As if summoned by our conversation, Inspector Japp himself appeared at our door, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by the grim satisfaction of a hunter who believes he has cornered his quarry. "Poirot, my friend," Japp announced, settling his considerable bulk into the offered chair. "I'm afraid your services won't be needed much longer on this one. We've got our man, and the evidence is mounting like a house of cards, all pointing in the same direction. You speak of young Mr. Lessing, I presume?" "The very same." Japp produced his notebook with theatrical flourish. "First, we have motive. Clear as daylight. The boy owed nearly £3,000 to some very unsavory characters in the East End. Darnley had promised him employment, then withdrew the offer when he learned of the gambling debts, called him irresponsible, and suggested he learn the value of money before expecting to handle other people's." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Most illuminating. And the method?" "Ah, that's where it gets interesting." Japp leaned forward conspiratorially. "We found a small bottle of aconite tincture in the cloakroom, wrapped in tissue paper behind young Lessing's coat. Chemist's label with his name on the receipt, dated 3 months ago." "Aconite," I murmured. "That would certainly explain the rapid onset of symptoms Dr. Peveril described." "Exactly. Applied to the rim of the water glass. Colorless, nearly tasteless in small quantities. Wouldn't be noticed until it was too late. And here's the clincher," Japp continued, producing a square of white linen from his pocket. "Found this handkerchief under the dining room table, right beneath where Darnley was sitting. Monogrammed HL, clear as day. The evidence mounts. The butler, Graves, when questioned further, had provided additional damaging testimony. Mr. Lessing did indeed enter the dining room approximately 10 minutes before dinner was announced," Japp reported. "Claimed he was looking for a mislaid cigarette case, but Graves observed him standing near the head of the table where Darnley was to sit." "And the servants?" Poirot inquired. "The parlour-maid, Elsie, confirmed she saw Lessing in the dining room during her final preparations. Said he appeared flurried and asked her the time repeatedly. Nervous behavior, if you ask me." I found myself nodding along with Japp's reasoning. The case against young Lessing did seem compelling. Motive, means, opportunity, and physical evidence all aligned with damning precision. Yet something in Poirot's manner suggested he remained far from convinced. "You have arrested him?" Poirot asked quietly. This morning. Broke down completely when confronted with the evidence, admitted he'd been in the dining room alone, claimed he was merely checking the arrangements for his aunt. Pretty thin excuse, considering the circumstances. Poirot's reservations. After Japp's departure, I expected Poirot to express satisfaction at the case's apparent resolution. Instead, he sat in brooding contemplation, his fingers drumming against his knee in the rhythm that indicated intense mental activity. "You disagree with Japp's conclusions?" I ventured. "I disagree with the haste of his acceptance, mon ami. Young Lessing is indeed desperate, and desperation can drive men to terrible acts. But consider the psychology of our crime." He rose and began his characteristic pacing. This was not the work of a desperate amateur, but of a mind that planned with meticulous care and theatrical flair. He paused by the window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded street. The anonymous letter that brought us to Wren House. Would a desperate young man announce his intentions to Hercule Poirot? The precise application of poison to the glass rim. Would an amateur risk such a delicate method when simpler means were available? No, Hastings, this crime has an elegance, a sophistication that speaks of a different type of mind entirely. But the evidence, the evidence. Consider how conveniently it presents itself. A handkerchief, monogrammed and perfectly placed for discovery. A bottle of poison, carefully preserved with the purchaser's name clearly visible. It is almost as if someone wished Inspector Japp to reach precisely the conclusion he has reached. An unexpected visitor. Our discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Miss Beatrice Foyle, Mrs. Wren's companion. She appeared unusually agitated, her customary composed demeanor cracked by obvious distress. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive the intrusion, but I felt compelled to speak with you. The arrest of Mr. Hugh has created quite a stir in the household, and I fear there are details that may not have been properly considered. Please, mademoiselle, seat yourself and tell me what troubles you." Miss Foyle perched nervously on the edge of her chair, her gloved hands twisted in her lap. "It concerns Mr. Darnley's behavior on the evening he died. You see, he arrived quite early, nearly an hour before the other guests, and asked specifically to examine Sir Ambrose's collection of snuff boxes." Poirot's interest sharpened visibly. "This was unusual?" "Most unusual. Guests typically wait in the drawing room for formal introductions to the collection, but Mr. Darnley was most insistent, and Mrs. Wren felt obliged to accommodate him. He spent considerable time in the library where the boxes are displayed, asking detailed questions about their provenance and value. He was alone during this examination. For the most part, yes. Mrs. Wren attended him briefly, but she was needed in the kitchen. I remained nearby, as is proper, but Mr. Darnley seemed to prefer examining the pieces without observation. Miss Foyle's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He expressed particular interest in one piece, an 18th century gold box with enamel panels. He asked if it might be available for private purchase, offering what he called a very generous sum for such a charming trinket. "This box, it is valuable?" "Extremely so. Sir Ambrose purchased it at auction last year for £8,000, and its value has only increased. He considers it the crown jewel of his collection." The pattern emerges. After Miss Foyle's departure, Poirot sat in contemplative silence, his fingers steepled before him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet certainty that marked his most important deductions. "You see now, Hastings, why I cannot accept Inspector Japp's convenient solution. Young Mr. Lessing may be guilty of gambling, of desperation, even of poor judgment in his choice of creditors. But the mind that conceived this murder is far more subtle than that of a desperate debtor. You believe someone else killed Darnley? I believe someone has used the boy's unfortunate circumstances as the perfect camouflage for their own carefully planned revenge. The handkerchief was placed, not dropped. The aconite bottle was positioned, not hidden. And the true motive?" He paused, his eyes taking on that familiar gleam of understanding. The true motive may have nothing to do with employment promises or gambling debts, but with something far more valuable and far more dangerous to expose. He rose and moved to his desk, where he began sketching the layout of Sir Ambrose's library. No, mon ami, the dinner guest who never ate has more secrets to reveal before this case reaches its true conclusion. We must look beyond the obvious, beyond the convenient, to the psychology of a killer who plays chess while others play checkers. This concludes Section 3 of The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. While the authorities believe they have found their killer in the desperate Hugh Lessing, Poirot's investigation has uncovered evidence of a far more complex motive involving valuable collectibles and a carefully orchestrated frame-up that goes to the heart of the Wren household itself. The morning following Hugh Lessing's arrest dawned grey and sullen over Belgrave Square, matching my own mood as I accompanied Poirot back to Wren House. Despite Inspector Japp's confidence in his case, my friend's manner suggested he viewed the young man's guilt with considerable skepticism. "You see, Hastings," Poirot explained as we approached the imposing facade, "a crime of such apparent simplicity often conceals the most complex motivations. The evidence against young Lessing, it is too neat, too perfectly arranged, like a stage set designed to convince an audience of a particular truth." Graves admitted us with his customary dignity, though I detected a certain relief in his demeanor, the relief of a household staff that believes the worst has passed. We were conducted immediately to the dining room, where the scene of the crime awaited our examination. The physical evidence speaks, with the methodical precision that marked all his investigations. Poirot approached Darnley's place setting. The water glass still bore the faint residue that had proved so deadly, and Poirot studied it with the intensity of a scholar examining an ancient manuscript. "Observe the waterline inside the glass, mon ami," he murmured, indicating the clear demarcation where the water had stood. "Note that it remains unbroken, with no trace of dissolved substance below the rim. This tells us something of crucial importance about the timing of our killer's work." I peered closely at the glass, beginning to understand his reasoning. The poison was applied after the water was poured? Precisement. Had the toxin been placed on the rim beforehand, the water would have dissolved traces and carried them downward, creating a different pattern entirely. Our killer worked with great precision, applying the fatal substance only after the table was fully prepared. He turned his attention to the place card beside the setting, handling it with delicate care. "And here, feel along this edge with your fingernail." I did so and detected a slight roughness. It has been handled extensively, folded and smoothed repeatedly. The nervous gesture of someone rearranging the seating, perhaps, or the careful work of one who wished to ensure Mr. Darnley sat in precisely the right position. The snuff box revelation. Our examination was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Ambrose, who appeared considerably more fragile than he had the evening of the dinner. The arrest of his nephew had clearly shaken him, yet something in his manner suggested additional concerns weighed upon his mind. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm grateful for your continued interest in this terrible affair," he said, his scholarly hands trembling slightly. "Though I confess I'm puzzled by your presence here when the authorities seem satisfied with their conclusions. Monsieur, I find myself curious about certain aspects of Mr. Darnley's visit that evening. You mentioned he arrived early to examine your collection." Sir Ambrose's expression darkened. "Indeed, and I'm afraid his behavior was most inappropriate. He handled my pieces as if he were conducting an appraisal rather than admiring their historical significance. His questions were entirely commercial in nature. Insurance values, market trends, potential for appreciation. He expressed interest in particular items. My Louis XVII snuff box with the Watteau panels. He examined it extensively, even suggesting I might consider a private sale. When I explained that the piece was not for sale at any price, he became quite insistent, implying that a man of my age should consider liquidating assets for more practical purposes. Poirot's eyes sharpened with interest, Might we examine this piece, monsieur? In the library, Sir Ambrose unlocked the glass case containing his treasured collection. The snuff box in question was indeed magnificent, gold with exquisite enamel panels depicting pastoral scenes in the style of Watteau. Yet as Poirot studied it carefully, his expression grew increasingly thoughtful. Tell me, Sir Ambrose, have you had this piece authenticated recently? Authenticated. But of course, when I purchased it 18 months ago. The provenance was impeccable, the documentation thorough. And since then, I see no need. The piece has never left my possession. Poirot nodded slowly, but I detected something in his manner that suggested he had formed a significant conclusion. The lock on this case, it has been tampered with recently. Very skillfully, but tampered nonetheless. Sir Ambrose examined the mechanism with growing alarm. Impossible. I keep the key with me always, except when showing the collection to guests. And where do you keep it during such occasions? In the desk drawer, naturally. It's more convenient when conducting tours. Poirot moved to the desk and examined the drawer carefully. From the inner corner, he extracted a tiny fragment of what appeared to be wax. Someone has taken an impression of your key, monsieur. The question is whether this was done for future theft or to create evidence of such intention. The psychological profile. As we returned to the morning room, Poirot's manner had shifted to that intense concentration I recognized as the prelude to his most brilliant deductions. He requested that the remaining household members be gathered, ostensibly for a final clarification of certain details. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began when all were assembled, "the arrest of Mr. Lessing has provided a convenient conclusion to this tragic affair, yet I find myself troubled by the very convenience of that conclusion." Mrs. Lydia Wren, still composed despite the strain of recent events, regarded him with careful attention. "Surely you don't question the police findings, Monsieur Poirot? The evidence seemed quite conclusive." "Indeed, madam, the evidence is most conclusive. Perhaps too conclusive for a crime supposedly committed in desperate haste by an amateur." He began his characteristic pacing, his keen eyes studying each face in turn. "Consider the psychology of what we have witnessed. A young man, driven by gambling debts and wounded pride, supposedly decides to murder his benefactor during a formal dinner party. Yet this same desperate amateur manages to apply poison with surgical precision, plants evidence with criminal expertise, and executes his crime with the sophistication of a master." Dr. Peveril shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Desperation can drive men to extraordinary measures, Poirot." "True, Doctor, but desperation typically produces crude methods, not elegant ones. The killer we seek possessed not only the knowledge to use aconite effectively, but the psychological sophistication to frame an innocent man with devastating precision." The frame revealed. Poirot paused before the mantelpiece, his gaze encompassing the entire assembled group. "You see, the true murderer understood several crucial elements that young Lessing could never have grasped. First, they knew Inspector Japp's investigative methods well enough to provide exactly the type of evidence he would find most convincing. Second, they possessed intimate knowledge of this household's routines and relationships. Third, they understood Mr. Darnley's character and methods well enough to predict his behavior precisely. Miss Beatrice Foyle, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, suddenly spoke. "Are you suggesting that someone used Hugh's unfortunate circumstances deliberately?" "I'm suggesting, mademoiselle, that someone orchestrated this entire evening as an elaborate theatrical performance, with Mr. Darnley cast as the victim and young Lessing as the convenient scapegoat." Poirot's voice carried the quiet authority that marked his most important revelations. "The anonymous letter that brought me here was not a warning, but an invitation to witness a masterpiece of deception." He moved to the window, gazing out at the grey London afternoon. "Our killer possesses several distinguishing characteristics. They have access to this household, knowledge of valuable objects and their authentication, understanding of police procedures, and most importantly, a motive that goes far deeper than the surface relationships we have observed. The silence that followed was heavy with tension, broken only by the distant sound of traffic in Belgrave Square. Each person in the room seemed to be calculating their own position, wondering what Poirot had deduced and how much he truly knew. The question that remains, Poirot continued, turning back to face the group, is whether our killer acted from greed, fear, or revenge. The answer to that question will reveal not only their identity, but the true reason Felix Darnley had to die. As he spoke these words, I watched the faces around the room with growing fascination. Fear, calculation, and in one case, something that looked very much like the beginning of panic flickered across the assembled features. The psychological pressure was mounting, and I sensed that Poirot's careful trap was beginning to close around its intended prey. The game, as my friend would say, was afoot, and the next move would determine whether justice would be served, or whether a clever killer would escape through the very perfection of their crime. This concludes Section 4 of The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. Poirot has systematically dismantled the case against Hugh Lessing while revealing the sophisticated nature of the true killer's methods. The focus has shifted from a crime of passion to one of calculated revenge, with the valuable snuffbox collection providing a crucial clue to the murderer's true motive. The psychological pressure is mounting as Poirot prepares to expose the real culprit in the chapters to follow. The morning following our revelations about the flawed evidence against Hugh Lessing found Poirot in a contemplative mood. He had arranged, through Sir Ambrose's reluctant cooperation, for what he termed a small experiment in human nature to take place that afternoon at Wren House. As we prepared to depart, he explained his methodology with characteristic precision. You see, Hastings, the human mind under pressure reveals truths that direct questioning cannot extract. Our killer believes they have succeeded perfectly. Young Lessing arrested, the case apparently closed. But this very confidence will be their undoing, for they will not expect the subtle pressures I intend to apply. What sort of pressures? The pressure of possibility, mon ami. I shall demonstrate to each suspect that their carefully constructed alibis contain flaws, that their motives are transparent, and that their methods are not as clever as they believe. One among them will react not with mere concern, but with the specific fear of exposure that marks the guilty mind. The reconstruction. Upon our arrival at Wren House, Poirot requested that the dining room be restored exactly as it had been on the fatal evening. The servants, under Graves' supervision, reset the table with meticulous care, each place setting positioned precisely as memory and notes dictated. The crystal water glasses caught the afternoon light, creating an almost ceremonial atmosphere. Ladies and gentlemen, Poirot addressed the assembled household, I ask your indulgence for this small theater. Inspector Japp believes the case closed, but I find myself troubled by certain inconsistencies that demand clarification. He began by examining the place settings with his characteristic attention to detail, producing a magnifying glass to study the place cards. Observe, if you will, the evidence of nervous handling. He held up Darnley's place card, indicating the subtle wear along one edge. This card has been folded and smoothed repeatedly, the gesture of someone rearranging the seating with considerable anxiety. Mrs. Wren shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Surely any host might adjust arrangements to ensure proper precedence. Indeed, madame, but observe also this second pattern of handling. Poirot indicated tiny indentations along the card's corner. These marks suggest examination by someone with filed fingernails, someone who handled the card with the precision of an appraiser rather than the casual touch of a host. The implication hung in the air like incense, and I watched the faces around us for telltale reactions. Sir Ambrose appeared genuinely puzzled, while Miss Beatrice Foyle maintained her customary composed expression. Dr. Peveril frowned with professional interest, and Miss Vera Linton's theatrical training showed in her carefully neutral features. The interrogation begins. Poirot's next move was to conduct what he termed clarifying conversations with each suspect, using Sir Ambrose's study as his stage. His first subject was Mrs. Lydia Wren herself, and I observed his technique with growing admiration for its subtle effectiveness. Mrs. Wren, your charitable work brings you into contact with many influential people. Mr. Darnley's support must have been particularly valuable. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, his contribution would have allowed us to expand our reach significantly. And his personal interest in your work. Was it purely philanthropic? A flush crept up Mrs. Wren's neck, barely visible above her pearl choker. Mr. Darnley was enthusiastic about my capabilities. He suggested I might consider opportunities beyond my current scope. Opportunities that might have conflicted with your duties as Sir Ambrose's wife. I made my position quite clear to Mr. Darnley. I'm devoted to my husband and our life together. Her voice carried conviction, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Sir Ambrose followed, and Poirot skillfully guided the conversation toward the snuff-box collection. Your passion for these historical pieces is evident, monsieur. It must have been distressing to have Mr. Darnley treat them as mere commodities. Deeply distressing. The man had no appreciation for their historical significance, only their monetary value. He was particularly interested in my Louis XIV piece with the Watteau panels, suggesting it would fetch a handsome sum at auction. Poirot's eyes sharpened with interest. He examined it closely, extensively. I found his attention somewhat inappropriate. He handled it as if conducting an appraisal, asking detailed questions about its provenance and authentication. And the key to your display case. You mentioned keeping it in your desk drawer during such examinations. Sir Ambrose nodded absently. A matter of convenience when showing the collection to guests. The web of manipulation. As the afternoon progressed, Poirot's interviews revealed a disturbing pattern in Felix Darnley's behavior. Each suspect had experienced his particular brand of manipulation, tailored to their individual vulnerabilities and desires. Miss Vera Linton spoke of promised recording contracts that came with personal considerations. Dr. Peveril revealed that Darnley had offered to invest in a private clinic, contingent upon the doctor's willingness to provide discreet medical services for Darnley's associates. Even young Hugh Lessing, now languishing in prison, had been offered employment that required him to demonstrate loyalty through unspecified services. Mrs. Honoria Gale proved particularly illuminating when questioned about her professional observations. Felix Darnley was a collector, Monsieur Poirot, not just of objects, but of people. He identified what each person wanted most desperately, then positioned himself as the sole provider of that desire. It gave him tremendous power over his victims. Victims, madame? A strong word. An accurate one. He created dependencies, then exploited them. I've seen it countless times in society. The wealthy benefactor who becomes the puppet master. The crucial discovery. It was during his examination of Sir Ambrose's library that Poirot made the discovery that would prove central to the case. While Sir Ambrose waited nervously, Poirot studied the display case containing the precious snuff boxes with intense concentration. Sir Ambrose, might I examine your Louis XV piece more closely? With obvious reluctance, Sir Ambrose unlocked the case and carefully removed the exquisite box. Poirot studied it through his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the hallmarks and enamel work. Tell me, monsieur, when did you last have this piece professionally authenticated? When I purchased it 18 months ago. The documentation was thorough, the provenance impeccable. Poirot's expression grew grave. I fear I must deliver distressing news. This piece, while expertly crafted, is not the box you purchased. It is a reproduction of exceptional quality, but the enamel work lacks the subtle variations of age, and the hallmark, while convincing, bears the characteristics of modern tooling. Sir Ambrose staggered as if physically struck. Impossible. The case has never been opened except in my presence. Except, perhaps, when a wax impression was taken of your key and a duplicate made. Your treasure was replaced at leisure, and you continued to admire what you believed to be your prized possession. The implications were staggering. Someone had executed a sophisticated theft, replacing a valuable artifact with a masterful forgery. Darnley, with his appraiser's eye, had discovered the substitution and begun to exploit this knowledge. The pressure mounts. As the afternoon's revelations accumulated, I could see the psychological pressure building among the assembled suspects. Someone in this room had committed not merely murder, but an elaborate theft and forgery scheme that Darnley had threatened to expose. Poirot gathered everyone in the drawing room for his concluding observations. Ladies and gentlemen, we have uncovered a web of manipulation and deception that extends far beyond the simple murder of Felix Darnley. We have discovered a sophisticated criminal mind that operated under the very noses of those who trusted them most completely. He paused, his keen gaze moving from face to face. Our killer possessed several crucial advantages. Intimate knowledge of this household's routines, access to valuable objects and their authentication, understanding of human psychology sufficient to manipulate multiple victims, and, most importantly, the complete trust of everyone involved. Miss Beatrice Foyle, who had remained silent throughout most of the afternoon, suddenly spoke. You seem to be suggesting that the murderer was someone with particular access to the household, Monsieur Poirot. Indeed, mademoiselle, someone who moved through these rooms like a ghost, observing everything while remaining virtually invisible. Someone whose position granted them the perfect camouflage for the most elaborate deception. The silence that followed was pregnant with tension. I could see fear beginning to replace confidence in several faces, and I sensed that Poirot's psychological game was approaching its climax. Tomorrow, he announced with theatrical precision, I shall gather you all once more for the final revelation. Tonight, I suggest each of you examine your consciences carefully, for the truth, once revealed, will admit no further deception. As we prepared to leave, I noticed that one member of our group appeared particularly pale, their composure finally beginning to crack under the relentless pressure of Poirot's investigation. The psychological game had achieved its intended effect. The killer now knew that their perfect crime was unraveling, thread by carefully woven thread. This concludes Section 5 of The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. Poirot's psychological investigation has revealed the full extent of Darnley's manipulative nature while uncovering a sophisticated forgery scheme involving Sir Ambrose's valuable snuff-box collection. The mounting pressure has begun to crack the killer's composure, setting the stage for the final confrontation where all deceptions will be exposed and justice finally served. The night following Poirot's psychological theater at Wren House proved to be far from peaceful. I awoke to the insistent ringing of our telephone at 1:30 in the morning and emerged from my room to find Poirot already fully dressed, his tie immaculate despite the hour. Wren House, Hastings, he announced with satisfaction. It appears our little performance yesterday has produced the desired effect. Someone has been compelled to take action under cover of darkness. The fog-shrouded streets of Belgrave Square seemed particularly ominous as we made our way to the Wren residence. Graves admitted us with uncharacteristic haste, his usual composure cracked by the night's events. "A fire, sir," he explained as he led us through the corridors. "In Sir Ambrose's study, Miss Foyle discovered it and raised the alarm before any serious damage occurred." The study bore the acrid smell of charred paper and the lingering tang of smoke. Sir Ambrose sat wrapped in a dressing gown, coughing intermittently, while Dr. Peveril attended him with professional concern. Mrs. Wren hovered nearby, her usual composure finally showing cracks of strain. The selective destruction, Poirot's examination of the scene revealed the methodical nature of the incident. The fire had been contained to the wastepaper basket, which sat closer to the desk than usual. The flames had consumed a specific collection of documents, authentication certificates, appraisal records, and correspondence related to Sir Ambrose's collection. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, studying the blackened remains with his magnifying glass. This was not the work of an arsonist, but of a gardener, someone pruning away the evidence that might expose their deception. He pointed to the desk drawer where Sir Ambrose kept his keys. The lock mechanism shows traces of soap. Someone has cleaned it hastily after handling. And here, caught on the drawer's edge, a fragment of blue ribbon of the type used by efficient housekeepers to organize documents. Miss Beatrice Foyle, who had been standing quietly near the window, stepped forward. "I use blue ribbon for the household papers, Monsieur Poirot. It's a system I've employed in all my positions. It ensures proper organization." "Indeed, mademoiselle. And your discovery of this fire. You were abroad in the house at such a late hour." Mrs. Wren often suffers from headaches that require attention during the night. "I was returning from the kitchen with her tisane when I detected the smell of smoke." The professional touch inspector Japp's arrival brought official scrutiny to the scene, though he deferred to Poirot's initial observations. As they examined the destroyed documents, a pattern emerged that suggested far more than simple panic. The fire consumed very specific materials, Poirot noted. Authentication certificates, insurance appraisals, correspondence with auction houses, all relating to the verification and valuation of Sir Ambrose's collection. Yet personal papers, financial records, and other valuable documents remain untouched. Among the partially burned fragments, Poirot discovered the remains of what appeared to be professional letterhead. The few legible words included certified appraiser and decorative arts specialist. Sir Ambrose examined the fragments with growing bewilderment. "I don't recognize this correspondence. These appear to be professional documents, but I've had no recent appraisals conducted." "Perhaps, monsieur, the appraisals were conducted without your knowledge," Poirot suggested quietly. The network revealed. As dawn broke over London, Poirot's methodical investigation of the study revealed additional evidence of the midnight visitor's activities. Behind a row of books, he discovered a small portfolio that had apparently been overlooked in the haste of document destruction. The portfolio contained materials that painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception. There were detailed photographs of various pieces in Sir Ambrose's collection, accompanied by notes in a precise hand regarding their market values and potential for replication. Most significantly, there were letters discussing special commissions with craftsmen known for their ability to create historically accurate reproductions. "Someone has been conducting a thorough cataloguing of your treasures, Sir Ambrose," Poirot announced. "Not for insurance purposes, but for far more sinister intentions." The handwriting in the portfolio was neat, feminine, and unmistakably that of someone with extensive experience in organizing and documenting valuable objects. When compared to the household records kept by Miss Foyle, the similarity was unmistakable. The trap tightens. Miss Foyle's reaction to this discovery was carefully controlled, but I noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she observed Poirot's examination of the evidence. Her explanation was prompt and reasonable. She had taken the photographs and notes as part of her duties in maintaining household inventories for insurance purposes. "Mrs. Wren asked me to create comprehensive records of Sir Ambrose's collection," she explained. "The photographs were taken to assist with insurance valuations and security arrangements." "Most thorough, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "And these letters regarding reproductions, they were also part of your insurance duties?" A flush crept up Miss Foyle's neck. "I was researching the possibility of having copies made for display purposes to protect the originals from handling during tours and examinations." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, but I could see his little gray cells working furiously. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture, though the complete image remained tantalizingly out of reach. The professional background. As the investigation continued, additional details emerged about Miss Foyle's background that cast her presence in the household in an entirely new light. Her references, when examined more closely, revealed a pattern of employment with wealthy collectors, always in positions that provided intimate access to valuable collections. Your previous employer, Mademoiselle, Lord Pemberton of Surrey, he also collected 18th century artifacts, did he not? Lord Pemberton had a modest collection of porcelain, she replied carefully. Nothing approaching the significance of Sir Ambrose's treasures. And yet, curiously, Lord Pemberton reported the theft of several valuable pieces during your tenure. Most unfortunate timing. Miss Foyle's composure finally showed signs of strain. Theft is an occupational hazard in houses containing valuable objects, Monsieur Poirot. Servants come and go. Security is often inadequate. Indeed. And your qualifications for appraising such objects, they come from your late husband's interests, perhaps? My husband was knowledgeable about antiques. I learned much from him during our marriage. But Poirot's expression suggested he found this explanation insufficient. The evidence was mounting that Miss Beatrice Foyle was far more than the simple companion she appeared to be. The psychological, victorious. We prepared to leave Wren House. Poirot gathered the assembled household for a brief announcement. His manner was grave but confident, that of a man who has seen the essential truth, even if all details remain to be clarified. Ladies and gentlemen, last night's incident has provided valuable insights into our investigation. The destruction of specific documents, the careful selection of materials to be eliminated, suggests a mind that understands exactly what evidence might prove dangerous. He paused, his keen gaze moving from face to face. Our killer is not the desperate amateur we were meant to believe, but a professional who has operated successfully for some time. The murder of Felix Darnley was not a crime of passion, but a calculated elimination of a threat to an ongoing criminal enterprise. Miss Foyle remained perfectly still during this pronouncement, but I noticed her breathing had become shallow and rapid. The psychological pressure was having its intended effect. Tomorrow, Poirot announced, I shall gather you all for the final revelation. Tonight's events have provided the last pieces of evidence necessary to expose not merely a murderer, but an entire network of deception that has operated under the very noses of those who trusted most completely. As we departed into the grey London morning, I could see that the midnight incident had achieved exactly what Poirot had hoped. The killer's confidence was shaken, their careful plans disrupted, and their true nature beginning to emerge from behind the mask of respectability they had worn so successfully. The invisible woman who had moved through Wren House like a ghost was about to be revealed in the harsh light of justice, and her elaborate deception would finally be exposed for all to see. This concludes Section 6 of The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. The midnight fire has revealed the sophisticated nature of the criminal operation, while increasing the psychological pressure on Miss Foyle. Evidence of her professional background and systematic approach to theft is mounting, though the final revelation remains for Poirot's dramatic conclusion. The trap is tightening around the killer, whose perfect crime is beginning to unravel under the methodical investigation of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. It is one of the peculiar characteristics of my friend Hercule Poirot that he approaches the gathering of evidence with the same meticulous care that a master jeweler employs in setting precious stones. The morning following the midnight fire at Wren House found him in his sitting room, arranging his notes with mathematical precision while his breakfast grew cold, a sure sign that his little grey cells were working at their highest capacity. "You see, Hastings," he announced without looking up from his papers, "our arsonist has done us a considerable service. In attempting to destroy evidence, they have instead revealed the true nature of their criminal enterprise. The fire was not the desperate act of a cornered amateur, but the calculated move of a professional who understands exactly which documents pose the greatest threat. I settled into my chair, accepting the coffee Georges silently provided. The destroyed authentication records. Precisement. But observe what was not destroyed. Personal correspondence, financial records, household accounts. Our killer eliminated only those documents that could expose their expertise in art authentication and forgery. This tells us we are dealing with someone whose knowledge extends far beyond the amateur's understanding of valuable objects. The chemist's tale. Our first expedition took us to a narrow-fronted establishment in Pimlico, where amber bottles lined the shelves like a regiment of silent sentinels. The proprietor, a precise man with pince-nez and the careful manner of one who deals in dangerous substances, examined Poirot's credentials with professional interest. "We are investigating the purchase of aconite tincture," Poirot explained with his most diplomatic manner. "A small bottle, purchased 3 months ago under the name H. Lessing." The chemist's expression sharpened with recognition. "Indeed, I recall that transaction distinctly. Aconite is not commonly requested, and when it is, I insist upon proper documentation and identification." "The purchaser, you remember them clearly?" "Most certainly. A woman, early 30s, well-educated speech. She wore grey gloves and spoke with unusual precision about the intended use, claimed it was for medicinal purposes under a physician's guidance." He paused, consulting his memory with professional care. "What struck me most particularly was her perfume, violets, quite distinctive. Orris root base, if I'm not mistaken." I felt a chill of recognition. "Miss Vera Linton wears violet scent," I murmured to Poirot as we departed. "Indeed, mon ami, but so might any number of ladies. We do not leap to conclusions. We collect facts and allow them to speak for themselves." The craftsman's workshop. From Pimlico, we journeyed to Clerkenwell, to a workshop that smelled of metal polish and varnish. The proprietor, a skilled artisan with magnifying lenses attached to his spectacles, looked up from his delicate work with the wary curiosity of one accustomed to clients who ask careful questions. Poirot's approach was masterful in its subtlety. "We understand you create reproduction pieces for collectors, museum copies, display sets for those who prefer not to risk their originals." "All legitimate work," the man replied quickly. "Every piece properly marked as a reproduction, all commissions fully documented. Naturellement, we seek information about a particular commission, French enamel work, 18th century style. Snuff boxes, perhaps?" The craftsman's expression grew thoughtful. "There was such a commission some 18 months past. Exceptional attention to detail. The client provided photographs, measurements, even notes on aging patterns and wear marks. Wanted the reproduction to be virtually indistinguishable from the original to casual observation." "The client's name?" "No direct contact. A go-between handled the arrangements. Professional gentleman, left-handed if you noted his signature. Paid with postal orders, signed the receipt HP. Said the work was for a private collector who required absolute discretion." As we left the workshop, I turned to Poirot with growing excitement. "Dr. Peveril's initials, and he is left-handed. I noticed him making notes with his left hand during our interviews. Your observation is correct, Hastings, and significant. A left-handed person applying substance to a glass rim would create a particular pattern of distribution, but we must not allow one clue to blind us to others." Return to Wren House. Our afternoon return to Belgrave Square found the household in a state of barely controlled tension. The midnight fire had shaken everyone's composure, and I could sense the psychological pressure mounting with each passing hour. Poirot requested a private audience with Graves, the butler, whose professional memory proved invaluable. "The evening of the dinner, Graves, you mentioned Mr. Darnley complained his water tasted soapy and requested a fresh glass." "Indeed, sir. Most particular about it he was. I had Elsie fetch a clean glass from the pantry and replaced it myself, ensuring no detail was overlooked with guests arriving. And when you returned to inspect the table, Did you notice anything unusual about the place settings? Graves frowned, searching his memory with professional thoroughness. The place card at Mr. Darnley's setting had been turned inward, facing the chair rather than outward as I had arranged them. A small detail, but one that violated proper protocol. This seemingly minor observation carried enormous significance. Someone had handled Darnley's place setting after the table was properly arranged, and that someone possessed the nervous habit of fidgeting with small objects, a trait I had observed in Miss Beatrice Foyle during our interviews. The snuff-box revelation Sir Ambrose received us in his study, still pale from the shock of the previous night's events. Poirot's examination of the precious snuff-box collection revealed details that had escaped even the owner's careful attention. This Louis XV piece with the Watteau panels, Poirot observed, studying it through his magnifying glass. It is indeed magnificent, but tell me, Sir Ambrose, have you had it professionally authenticated recently? When I purchased it 18 months ago, naturally. The documentation was impeccable. Poirot's expression grew grave as he continued his examination. I fear I must deliver distressing news, monsieur. This piece, while of exceptional quality, bears the subtle characteristics of reproduction rather than original work. The enamel lacks the microscopic variations of age, and the hallmark, though convincing, shows evidence of modern tooling techniques. Sir Ambrose staggered as if physically struck. Impossible. It has never left my possession. Except, perhaps, when someone with access to your keys created a duplicate and executed the substitution during routine cleaning or rearrangement. Someone who possessed both the expertise to recognize the original's value and the connections to arrange for its replacement. The psychological pressure mounts. As evening approached, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room for what he termed a clarification of certain details. His manner carried that particular intensity I had learned to associate with the moments before his most significant revelations. Miss Beatrice Foyle sat with her customary composure, but I noticed her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her skirts. Her position near the window provided clear views of both entrances, the instinctive caution of someone preparing for confrontation. Ladies and gentlemen, Poirot began. Our investigation has revealed that the murder of Felix Darnley was not the desperate act of young Mr. Lessing, but the calculated elimination of a threat to a far more sophisticated criminal enterprise. He paused, allowing his words to settle over the assembled group like a heavy curtain. Someone in this room has operated for years under the perfect camouflage of respectability, using their position of trust to execute crimes of remarkable sophistication. The murder was merely the final act in a drama that began long before that fatal dinner. Miss Foyle's breathing became shallow and rapid, though she maintained her outward composure. The psychological pressure was having its intended effect. Tomorrow, Poirot announced with theatrical precision, I shall reveal not merely the identity of our killer, but the full extent of their criminal activities. Tonight, I suggest each of you examine your consciences carefully, for the truth, once exposed, admits no further deception. As we prepared to depart, I observed that Miss Foyle remained seated long after the others had dispersed, her gaze fixed on some invisible point in the distance. The invisible woman who had moved through Wren House like a ghost was finally beginning to materialize under the relentless pressure of Hercule Poirot's investigation. The game, as my friend would say, was approaching its final move, and the killer's perfect crime was about to be revealed as an elaborate house of cards built on deception and maintained through murder. This concludes Section 7th of The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. Poirot's methodical investigation has uncovered crucial evidence linking the murder to a sophisticated art forgery operation, while the psychological pressure has begun to crack the killer's carefully maintained facade. The stage is set for the final revelation, where all deceptions will be exposed and justice will finally be served. The grey London morning that followed our discoveries at Wren House found Hercule Poirot in a state of intense intellectual activity. He had arranged his accumulated evidence with mathematical precision across his sitting room table. Photographs, notes, chemical samples, and various small objects that to the untrained eye might seem insignificant, but which to his methodical mind represented the threads of an intricate tapestry of deception. "You see, Hastings," he announced without looking up from his meticulous arrangements, "we have been observing not merely a murder, but a masterpiece of criminal enterprise. The death of Felix Darnley was but the final brushstroke on a canvas that has been years in the painting." I settled into my chair, noting the particular intensity of his concentration. "You believe you've identified our killer?" "I believe, mon ami, that our killer has identified herself through the very perfection of her methods. Observe these items, each seemingly unrelated, yet each bearing the signature of a mind that operates with professional precision rather than amateur desperation." The microscopic revelation. Despite his thorough analysis, Poirot insisted upon one final examination of the crime scene. We returned to Wren House, where he requested solitary access to the dining room before the household stirred. His manner carried that particular intensity I'd learned to associate with moments of crucial discovery. Armed with his portable microscope and magnifying glass, Poirot approached Darnley's place setting with the dedication of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. He studied not merely the obvious evidence, but the microscopic details that had escaped all previous observation. "Hastings, regard this place card with the utmost attention," he commanded, producing his most powerful lens. On its underside, precisely where it rested against the tablecloth, observe this minute crystalline speck, barely visible to the naked eye, yet crucial to our understanding. I peered through the magnifying glass and could just discern a tiny, translucent fragment clinging to the card's surface. What significance could something so small possibly have? In the hands of Hercule Poirot, mon ami, the smallest detail often reveals the greatest truth. He carefully extracted the speck with surgical tweezers, placing it in a sterile vial. But first, we must discover its origin. Poirot then led me to a locked cabinet in the dining room's corner, one that contained the household's specialized cleaning and conservation supplies. With a key he had somehow acquired, he opened the cabinet to reveal an array of materials used for maintaining Sir Ambrose's precious collection. Among the various polishes and protective substances, he withdrew a small, unmarked jar containing a translucent, slightly waxy substance. The label indicated its use for conservation and protection of delicate enamel work on precious metals. A faint, soapy aroma emanated from the container. "Behold, Hastings, the murder weapon's true nature revealed." Under his portable microscope, the crystalline speck from the place card and a sample from the conservation jar proved to be identical. Mr. Darnley's complaint of a soapy taste was not imagination, but the direct result of our killer's sophisticated method. The professional network. Armed with this crucial evidence, our investigation expanded to explore the professional connections that had made such sophisticated crimes possible. Our journey took us to Bond Street, where the most prestigious art dealers and auction houses maintained their elegant establishments. At Sotheby's, discreet inquiries revealed that Miss Beatrice Foyle had been a frequent consultant over the past 2 years. Most knowledgeable about 18th century decorative arts, the records clerk confirmed. She often brought items for preliminary evaluation, demonstrating unusual expertise in detecting potential forgeries. The pattern continued at Christie's, where Miss Foyle was remembered for her clinical approach to authentication. She photographed pieces from multiple angles, took extensive notes, and asked very specific questions about market values and insurance requirements, the specialist recalled. From Bond Street, we proceeded to a discreet establishment in Jermyn Street, where Poirot's reputation secured us access to confidential financial records. Miss Foyle, we learned, had maintained an account for receiving substantial cash payments from various sources, always requiring absolute discretion. Several £1,000s annually, the gentleman confirmed, deposited in irregular installments. 3 weeks ago, she withdrew the entire balance, nearly £8,000, in preparation for what she termed an extended continental journey. The psychological pressure. Our return to Wren House found the household in a state of barely controlled tension. Miss Foyle maintained her customary composure, but I observed she had positioned herself near the morning room's secondary exit, the instinctive caution of someone preparing for potential flight. Poirot's approach was masterfully calculated. Rather than direct confrontation, he began what he termed the application of scientific pressure to reveal psychological truth. He gathered the household in the drawing room, ostensibly for a final clarification of certain details. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, producing the tiny vial containing the crystalline evidence, "our investigation has uncovered the true sophistication of the crime we have witnessed. The killer employed not crude poison, but a specialized conservation wax used exclusively for the care of precious enamel work." Miss Foyle's breathing became shallow, though she maintained her outward composure, her eyes fixed on the vial with the intensity of recognition. "This substance," Poirot continued, "applied to the rim of Mr. Darnley's water glass, dissolved slowly to create the soapy taste he complained of while delivering the fatal dose of aconite with surgical precision. It is a method that could only be conceived and executed by someone with intimate knowledge of art conservation techniques." The web titan's Poirot then revealed the extent of his discoveries, the professional network Miss Foyle had cultivated, her secret financial arrangements, her systematic documentation of valuable objects in multiple households. Each revelation struck with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, exposing the elaborate criminal enterprise that had operated under the perfect camouflage of domestic respectability. The murder of Felix Darnley, Poirot announced with quiet finality, was not a crime of passion, but a calculated business decision. Mr. Darnley's appraiser's eye had detected the substitution of Sir Ambrose's precious snuff box. His growing suspicions threatened to expose not merely one theft, but an entire network of forgery and deception spanning years and multiple households. Miss Foyle rose slowly from her chair, her composure finally showing cracks under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the bitter dignity of someone whose perfect crime had been systematically dismantled. "You understand nothing of necessity, Monsieur Poirot," she said with quiet resignation. "Nothing of what it means to possess knowledge and expertise while remaining invisible, unrecognized, dependent upon the charity of those who value objects more than human beings. I understand, mademoiselle, that you chose deception over honesty, murder over confession, and the destruction of an innocent young man over acceptance of responsibility for your actions. The final preparation. As the psychological pressure mounted, Poirot prepared for what he announced would be the final gathering, where all deceptions will be exposed and justice will finally be served. His manner carried the quiet confidence of a man who has assembled all the pieces of an intricate puzzle and now prepares to reveal the complete picture. Miss Beatrice Foyle, the invisible woman who had moved through the shadows of respectable society like a ghost, stood finally exposed in the harsh light of scientific evidence and methodical deduction. Her elaborate criminal enterprise, maintained through years of careful planning and ruthless execution, had been unraveled thread by the relentless application of Hercule Poirot's little gray cells. The stage was set for the final confrontation, where the full extent of her crimes would be revealed, and the truth would emerge triumphant over even the most sophisticated attempts at concealment. The microscopic clue that had escaped all other observation had become the key that would unlock the entire mystery, proving once again that in the hands of a master detective, no detail is too small to reveal the greatest truth. This concludes Section Art of The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. Poirot has discovered the crucial microscopic evidence linking Miss Foyle definitively to the murder through her specialized knowledge of art conservation. The psychological pressure is mounting as all her professional connections and criminal activities have been exposed, setting the stage for the final dramatic revelation where her complete confession and the full extent of her elaborate deception will be unveiled. The drawing room at Wren House had been transformed into something resembling a courtroom, though one presided over by the most unlikely of judges. Hercule Poirot stood before the assembled company with the quiet authority of a conductor preparing to guide his orchestra through a complex and demanding piece. The November afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to emphasize the gravity of the moment. Every suspect was present, arranged in a careful semicircle that allowed Poirot to observe each face as he prepared to expose the truth. Inspector Japp sat with obvious discomfort, his earlier confidence in Hugh Lessing's guilt having been thoroughly shaken by the Belgian detective's discoveries. Sir Ambrose appeared aged beyond his years, while Mrs. Lydia Wren maintained her composure despite the tremor in her hands as she twisted her pearl necklace. Dr. Peveril, Miss Vera Linton, and Mrs. Honoria Gale completed the assembly, each wearing expressions of expectant tension. Notably absent was Miss Beatrice Foyle, whose customary efficiency in household matters had apparently not extended to punctuality for this crucial gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began with ceremonial gravity, "we are gathered to conclude an investigation that has revealed not merely murder, but an elaborate criminal enterprise of remarkable sophistication. What began as the apparent crime of a desperate young man has proven to be something far more complex and far more dangerous." Dismantling the convenient truth, Poirot's first task was the systematic destruction of the case against Hugh Lessing, and he approached this with the precision of a surgeon removing a malignant growth. Inspector Japp, with commendable diligence, assembled what appeared to be overwhelming evidence against young Mr. Lessing: a monogrammed handkerchief, a bottle of aconite bearing his name, opportunity, and motive, all perfectly arranged for our discovery. He paused, his keen eyes sweeping over the assembled faces. But consider, mes amis, the psychology of such evidence. Would a desperate young man, acting in panicked haste, leave such perfectly incriminating proof so readily accessible? Non. The true criminal understands that the most convincing deception is built upon elements of truth, carefully twisted to serve their purpose. Inspector Japp shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "The evidence seemed conclusive, Poirot. The handkerchief was found directly beneath where Darnley collapsed." "Indeed, Inspector, and therein lies its very artificiality. The handkerchief was pristinely laundered, recently pressed, and showed no signs of having been carried in a pocket or used for any practical purpose. It was placed, not dropped, positioned with the same precision that marked every aspect of this crime. The technical mastery. Revealed with the theatrical flair that marked his most important revelations, Poirot produced the tiny vial containing the crystalline evidence discovered on Darnley's place card. The true genius of our killer lay not in the procurement of poison, but in its application. Mr. Darnley complained that his water tasted soapy, a curious observation that holds the key to understanding the sophisticated method employed. He moved to his demonstration table, where he had arranged a crystal glass, a small jar, and his portable microscope. The aconite was not simply dissolved in water, where it might be detected or might settle unevenly. Instead, it was incorporated into a specialized conservation wax, a substance used exclusively for the care and restoration of precious enamel work on 18th century artifacts. Under the microscope's projection, the crystalline structure of the substance became visible to all. This conservation compound, when applied to the rim of a crystal glass, dissolves slowly upon contact with moisture, creating the soapy taste Mr. Darnley detected while delivering its lethal cargo with surgical precision. It is a method that could only be conceived and executed by someone with intimate professional knowledge of art conservation techniques. Dr. Peveril leaned forward with professional interest. The symptoms I observed were indeed consistent with alkaloid poisoning, but the delivery method explains the rapid onset. Absorption through mucous membranes would be far more efficient than simple ingestion. The criminal enterprise. Exposed Poirot's revelation expanded beyond the murder itself, to expose the elaborate network of deception that had made it necessary. With documents recovered from various sources, he painted a picture of systematic criminal activity spanning years and multiple households. The murder of Felix Darnley was not an isolated crime of passion, but the calculated elimination of a threat to an ongoing criminal enterprise. For months, perhaps years, someone has been systematically replacing valuable artifacts in this household with expertly crafted forgeries, selling the originals through a sophisticated network of dealers and collectors. He produced photographs comparing Sir Ambrose's precious snuff box with documentation from its original purchase. Your Louis XV piece with the Watteau panels, Sir Ambrose, the pride of your collection, is no longer in your possession. What sits in your display case is a reproduction of extraordinary quality, but a reproduction nonetheless. Sir Ambrose stared at the evidence with the expression of a man watching his world collapse. Impossible! The case has never been opened except in my presence. Except when someone took a wax impression of your key and had a duplicate made. The substitution was executed during routine cleaning and maintenance, when your attention was elsewhere and your trust was absolute. The psychological profile. As his revelation continued, Poirot dissected the psychological motivations that had driven the killer to such elaborate crimes. Consider the mind capable of conceiving and executing such deception. We are not dealing with a crude opportunist, but with someone of exceptional intelligence and expertise. Someone who possessed intimate knowledge of valuable objects, their authentication, and their market value. He began his characteristic pacing, his eyes studying each face in turn. This person moved through respectable society with perfect camouflage, trusted completely by those they systematically betrayed. They understood the psychology of their victims, the routines of their households, and most importantly, they possessed the technical knowledge to execute forgeries that would pass all but the most expert scrutiny. The silence in the room was broken only by the distant sound of traffic in Belgrave Square and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The network of evidence. Poirot then revealed the full extent of his investigation. The chemist's description of a woman with precise speech and violet perfume purchasing aconite under Lessing's name. The craftsman in Clerkenwell who had been commissioned to create expert reproductions. The financial records showing substantial cash payments from mysterious sources. The professional connections with auction houses and art dealers. The individual we seek possessed several crucial advantages, he continued. Intimate knowledge of this household's routines, access to valuable objects and their documentation, understanding of art authentication procedures, and most importantly, the complete trust of everyone involved. A rustle of movement drew everyone's attention to the doorway, where Miss Beatrice Foyle appeared, her usual composure replaced by something harder and more calculating. She had clearly been listening from the corridor, and her entrance carried the weight of inevitability. "You speak eloquently of trust, Monsieur Poirot," she said with bitter dignity, stepping into the room with measured steps. "But you understand nothing of what it means to possess knowledge and expertise while remaining invisible, unrecognized, dependent upon the charity of those who value objects more than human beings." The confrontation begins. Miss Foyle moved to the center of the room with the confidence of someone who had finally abandoned all pretense. "Yes, I heard your little performance from the hallway. Very dramatic, very thorough. You've assembled your evidence with admirable precision." Poirot regarded her with the intense attention he reserved for crucial moments. "You do not deny the accusations, mademoiselle?" "Deny them? Why should I deny the only intelligent work I've accomplished in years of servitude? Her voice carried a bitterness that spoke of long-suppressed resentment. You think me a criminal, Monsieur Poirot, but I prefer to consider myself a redistributor of wealth, taking from those who hoard beauty they cannot truly appreciate and placing it where it can be properly valued. Inspector Japp rose from his chair, his hand moving instinctively toward his handcuffs, but Poirot gestured for him to wait. The psychological drama was reaching its climax, and he intended to extract every detail of the truth. And Felix Darnley threatened this redistribution. Miss Foyle's laugh was sharp and humorless. Felix Darnley was a vulgar man who saw everything in terms of monetary value. When he examined Sir Ambrose's collection with his appraiser's eye, he immediately recognized that the snuff box was not original. Rather than expose the substitution, he chose to use his knowledge as leverage, first attempting to blackmail me, then threatening to expose everything unless I agreed to become his partner in what he called expanded operations. The confession was coming now, drawn out by Poirot's careful psychological pressure and Miss Foyle's own need to justify her actions. The invisible woman who had moved through Wren House like a ghost was finally revealing herself in all her criminal sophistication, and the final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The stage was set for the ultimate revelation, where every deception would be exposed and justice would finally be served, though not perhaps in the manner anyone had expected when this deadly dinner party began. This concludes Section 9 of The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. Poirot has systematically dismantled the false case against Hugh Lessing while exposing the sophisticated nature of Miss Foyle's criminal enterprise. Her dramatic entrance and initial confession have set the stage for the final confrontation, where the complete truth will be revealed and the psychological battle between detective and killer will reach its climax. It is in the nature of Hercule Poirot to conduct his final revelations as a master conductor guides a symphony, each theme recalled and resolved with mathematical precision, each instrument entering at its appointed moment. The drawing room at Wren House had fallen into that peculiar hush that precedes the moment when all deceptions must finally yield to truth. Miss Beatrice Foyle stood in the center of the room with the bearing of a woman who had abandoned all pretense, her transformation from invisible companion to visible criminal now complete. Mademoiselle, Poirot began with ceremonial gravity, you speak of redistribution and necessity, but let us examine the true nature of your enterprise with the precision it deserves. This was not the desperate act of a cornered amateur, but the calculated masterpiece of a professional criminal whose sophistication rivals any I have encountered. Inspector Japp shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still grappling with how thoroughly his initial conclusions had been dismantled. Sir Ambrose sat pale and trembling, while Mrs. Wren twisted her pearl necklace with nervous fingers. The assembled company waited with the terrible fascination of witnesses to a public execution. The systematic destruction of false evidence. We begin, Poirot announced, with the systematic destruction of the case against young Mr. Hugh Lessing, a case so perfectly constructed that it convinced even the experienced Inspector Japp of its validity. He moved to his evidence table with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. The monogrammed handkerchief, the bottle of aconite, the opportunity, the motive, all arranged with theatrical precision for our discovery. He held up the pristine linen square. This handkerchief, Inspector, was purchased as part of a set 3 weeks ago at Harrods. The sales assistant remembered the transaction clearly, a lady buying for her young gentleman, paying in cash, requesting the finest Irish linen. The embroidery work was completed by Madame Dubois in Regent Street, who keeps meticulous records. The handkerchief had never been carried, never been used. It was a prop, placed beneath Mr. Darnley's chair with the same precision that marked every aspect of this crime. Miss Foyle's composure remained intact, but I observed the slight tremor in her hands as Poirot continued his methodical dismantling of her deception. The aconite bottle bearing Mr. Lessing's name presents an even more sophisticated deception. The chemist in Pimlico remembered the purchaser distinctly. A woman of early 30s, well-educated speech, wearing gray gloves and speaking with unusual precision about medicinal applications. Most significantly, he recalled her perfume, violets with an orris root base, the dry sachet variety rather than liquid scent. He produced a small envelope from his pocket. From your personal effects, mademoiselle, I recovered traces of the same orris root powder. You had observed that Miss Linton wore violet scent, providing another layer of misdirection should it be needed. But your own preference for sachets in the household linen betrayed you. The technical mastery. Revealed Poirot moved to his demonstration table, where he had arranged the crucial evidence of the murder method. The true genius of this crime lay not in the procurement of poison, but in its application. Mr. Darnley complained that his water tasted soapy, a detail that initially seemed insignificant, but which holds the key to understanding the sophisticated method employed. With theatrical precision, he displayed the conservation wax from Sir Ambrose's cabinet, alongside the microscopic evidence recovered from the crime scene. The aconite was not simply dissolved in water where it might be detected or settle unevenly. Instead, it was incorporated into this specialized conservation compound, a substance used exclusively for the care and restoration of precious enamel work on 18th century artifacts. Under his portable microscope's projection, the crystalline structure became visible to all. This compound, when applied to the rim of a crystal glass, dissolves slowly upon contact with moisture, creating the soapy taste Mr. Darnley detected while delivering its lethal cargo with surgical precision. It is a method that could only be conceived and executed by someone with intimate professional knowledge of art conservation techniques. Dr. Peveril leaned forward with professional fascination. The absorption through mucous membranes would indeed be more efficient than simple ingestion, explaining the rapid onset of symptoms I observed. Précisément, Doctor, but observe also the geometric evidence that seals our case. Poirot indicated the fatal water glass under magnification. When a right-handed person applies a substance to a rim while standing at the guest's shoulder, the residue is minutely thicker at the quarter circle nearest the dominant hand. The pattern on Mr. Darnley's glass shows this distribution precisely, eliminating left-handed suspects such as yourself, Doctor, while confirming the killer's dexterity. The criminal enterprise. Exposed. As his revelation expanded, Poirot painted a picture of criminal sophistication that left the assembled company stunned by its scope and audacity. The murder of Felix Darnley was merely the final act in a drama that has been years in the making. Mademoiselle Foyle, your career as a professional criminal began not here at Wren House, but in the household of Lord Pemberton in Surrey, where 3 valuable pieces of Sèvres porcelain disappeared during your tenure. He produced a comprehensive dossier of evidence. From Surrey, you moved to the Honourable Mrs. Whitfield in Bath, where Chippendale chairs and a Sheraton writing desk vanished during what appeared to be a burglary. Then to Colonel Morrison in Yorkshire, where a collection of miniatures was systematically replaced with expert forgeries. Your method was always identical. Gain a position of trust, study the valuable pieces with professional thoroughness, arrange for expert reproductions, then execute the substitutions during routine maintenance. Miss Foyle's mask of composure finally began to crack as the full extent of her exposure became clear. Your network of accomplices was extensive and sophisticated. The craftsman in Clerkenwell was merely one of several artisans you employed. There was the enamelist in Birmingham who specialized in aging techniques, the metalworker in Sheffield who could replicate historical hallmarks, and the woodcarver in Edinburgh whose furniture, reproductions were virtually indistinguishable from originals. The psychological profile. Poirot's analysis turned to the psychological motivations that had driven such elaborate crimes. You possessed exceptional intelligence and expertise, mademoiselle. Yet society relegated you to positions of invisible servitude. The resentment grew over time, Norm. You watched mediocre people inherit wealth and surround themselves with beauty they could neither understand nor truly appreciate, while you, with superior knowledge and refined taste, remained dependent upon their condescending charity. Miss Foyle's voice, when she finally spoke, carried the bitter dignity of someone whose deepest grievances had been perfectly understood. You comprehend more than most, Monsieur Poirot. I spent years moving through their privileged world like a ghost, cataloging treasures they barely noticed, maintaining collections they never truly appreciated. If I chose to ensure that beauty found its way to those who could properly value it, where was the harm? The harm, mademoiselle, lies in the deception, the systematic theft, and ultimately, the murder of a man whose only crime was recognizing your handiwork. The fatal confrontation. Felix Darnley arrived early that evening with the specific intention of examining Sir Ambrose's collection. His appraiser's eye immediately detected that the prized Louis XV snuff-box was not original. The enamel lacked the microscopic variations of age. The hallmark showed evidence of modern tooling techniques. He confronted you with his suspicions, but not to expose you. Miss Foyle's laugh was sharp and humorless. The man was insufferable in his vulgarity. He saw my expertise and my network, and he wanted partnership rather than justice. He suggested we could expand operations together, threatening to expose everything unless I agreed to make him my business partner. And so you decided he must be eliminated. But how to accomplish this without suspicion falling upon yourself? Your solution was diabolically clever. You would frame young Hugh Lessing, exploiting his gambling debts and desperate circumstances to create the perfect scapegoat. The perfect frame revealed. Poirot's reconstruction of the frame-up demonstrated the killer's psychological sophistication. You had observed Mr. Lessing's nervous habits, his tendency to fidget with small objects. You arranged for him to have a legitimate reason to be in the dining room before dinner, perhaps by subtly misplacing something he would search for. Graves observed him there, as you intended, creating the foundation for his apparent guilt. The place card at Mr. Darnley's setting bore the evidence of your nervous handling, the pressure marks, the repeated folding and smoothing that marked your anxiety about the evening's events. But most tellingly, it bore microscopic traces of the conservation wax from your fingers after you had prepared the fatal glass. Inspector Japp finally found his voice. The anonymous letter that brought Poirot to witness the murder, that was your work as well. Miss Foyle's smile carried a chilling pride. I wanted the great Hercule Poirot to witness my masterpiece. What value has the perfect crime if no one recognizes its artistry? I knew that with you in attendance, the case against young Lessing would be accepted without question, and my methods would be admired, even as they remained unrecognized. The final evidence. But you made errors, mademoiselle. The errors of a mind that admires itself too much. The midnight fire that destroyed your authentication documents was selective in its destruction, revealing your professional knowledge. The ribbon fiber caught in Sir Ambrose's desk drawer, the soap residue on the lock mechanism, the careful positioning of evidence, all betrayed the methodical mind that conceived this elaborate deception. Poirot produced the final piece of physical evidence, and this, the crystalline trace of conservation wax on the underside of Mr. Darnley's place card, where no innocent person would think to look. You handled the card after handling the poison compound, leaving microscopic evidence that no amount of careful planning could eliminate. Justice served. As Inspector Japp moved to make his arrest, Miss Beatrice Foyle straightened with the dignity of someone who had finally abandoned all pretense. I regret only that Felix Darnley's crude greed made murder necessary. The redistribution of unappreciated beauty was a noble enterprise. His death was merely an unfortunate business decision. You show no remorse for destroying young Lessing's life? Poirot asked quietly. Her expression hardened with chilling indifference. The boy was weak, foolish with money, and ultimately expendable. My plan accounted for the possibility of his acquittal. There was insufficient genuine evidence for conviction, but the suspicion would have served my purposes adequately. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Miss Foyle looked back at the assembled company with cold satisfaction. "You will remember me, all of you. The invisible woman who moved through your privileged world like a ghost, taking what she pleased while you remained oblivious. That, at least, is a form of immortality." The philosophical conclusion. After the police had departed with their prisoner, a profound silence settled over the drawing room. Sir Ambrose sat with his head in his hands, shattered by the betrayal of someone he had trusted completely. Mrs. Wren wept quietly for the young man who had suffered unjustly, while the other guests struggled to comprehend the sophisticated deception that had operated under their very noses. Poirot, who had remained motionless throughout the arrest, finally spoke with quiet reflection. "It is curious, mes amis, how the human heart can harbor such contradictions. Mademoiselle Foyle possessed exceptional intelligence, refined taste, and genuine expertise in appreciating beauty. Yet these very qualities, corrupted by resentment and pride, led her to create only ugliness, theft, deception, and murder." He moved to the window, gazing out at the grey London afternoon. She spoke of being invisible, unrecognized for her talents. But true appreciation of beauty comes not from possession, but from understanding. She understood the technical aspects of art, but she never comprehended its essential truth, that beauty shared enriches all, while beauty stolen diminishes everyone, including the thief. As we prepared to depart Wren House, Poirot paused to examine Sir Ambrose's snuff-box collection one final time. "The false thing to the false place," he murmured, carefully replacing the reproduction in its case, "until the true can be restored." In our cab returning to Whitehaven Mansions, I reflected on the case's conclusion. She was brilliant, Poirot. Cold, calculating, but undeniably brilliant. "The intelligence, oui," he replied, adjusting his tie with characteristic precision. "But intelligence without compassion becomes mere cleverness, and cleverness without conscience becomes cruelty." She wished me there to admire her work, but she could not resist the symmetry of having the great detective witness what she believed was the perfect crime. It was vanity, mon ami, that betrayed her in the end. And young Lessing will recover from this ordeal. The resilience of youth is remarkable, Hastings. He will heal, perhaps even learn wisdom from his suffering. But the true tragedy lies not in what was stolen, but in what was corrupted. The very concept of trust itself, murdered as surely as Felix Darnley by a mind that chose deception over honesty. As our cab disappeared into the London fog, I reflected on the case that would forever be known as the affair at the dinner guest who never ate. Felix Darnley had indeed failed to consume his final meal, but the true hunger for recognition, for appreciation, for justice had consumed everyone it touched, leaving only the bitter satisfaction of truth finally revealed, and justice, however imperfect, finally served. The invisible woman had been seen at last, but the price of that visibility would echo through the corridors of Wren House long after Hercule Poirot had departed to restore order to other disordered worlds. This concludes The Affair at the Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. The sophisticated criminal enterprise of Miss Beatrice Foyle has been completely exposed, the innocent Hugh Lessing vindicated, and justice served through the methodical application of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. The case stands as a testament to the truth that no crime, however cleverly conceived, can withstand the relentless pursuit of justice guided by logic, observation, and an understanding of human nature in all its complexity. The business of justice, though inexorable, seldom moves with the dramatic flourish of its detective. Prologue. In the grey November days that followed Miss Beatrice Foyle's arrest, life at Wren House arranged itself into a new, chastened order. The drawing room, once the stage for elegant dinner parties, now bore the invisible weight of betrayal and revelation, though the afternoon light still filtered through its tall windows with the same indifferent beauty. Inspector Japp, to his considerable credit, took the reversal of his initial conclusions with something approaching grace. "You nabbed this one cleanly, Poirot," he admitted when we called at the yard to conclude the formal proceedings. "I'll own I don't fancy being led by a handkerchief again." His gruff acknowledgement carried the wisdom of experience. Even the most seasoned investigators could be deceived by sufficiently sophisticated deception. Young Hugh Lessing's release came swiftly once Poirot's methodical documentation reached the proper authorities. I was present when he returned to Wren House, moving awkwardly as if the very floor might give way beneath him. His aunt rose to embrace him with an abandon that temporarily swept aside the decorums of Belgrave Square, and in that moment, something human and healing entered the wounded household. The network unraveled. The investigation's expansion revealed the staggering scope of Miss Foyle's criminal enterprise. Under interrogation, her network of accomplices proved far less resolute than their mastermind. The craftsman in Clerkenwell led authorities to specialists in Birmingham, Sheffield, and Edinburgh. Artisans capable of replicating everything from medieval manuscripts to Chippendale furniture with devastating accuracy. Financial records seized from her various accounts revealed transactions totaling more than £50,000, a fortune built upon the systematic plunder of England's cultural treasures. Her method had remained consistent across nearly a decade of operations. Secure a position of trust, study valuable pieces with professional thoroughness, arrange for expert reproductions, then execute substitutions during routine maintenance. The original pieces vanished into discrete continental networks, their provenance obscured, their theft undetected for years. Most disturbing was Miss Foyle's complete absence of remorse. During her interviews with Scotland Yard specialists, she maintained the cold conviction that her crimes represented cultural redistribution rather than theft. They possessed beauty they could neither understand nor appreciate, she told investigators with chilling certainty. I ensured these treasures found their way to collectors who could properly value their significance. Personal accountings. Sir Ambrose faced perhaps the most complex aftermath of all the victims. His beloved collection, the passion of his lifetime, had been systematically compromised by someone he had trusted completely. The authentication of each piece would require extensive professional examination, but the psychological impact would prove far more enduring than any financial losses. "I find myself questioning everything, Monsieur Poirot," he confessed during our final visit to his violated library. "Each piece I examine, I wonder, is this genuine, or am I admiring another of her masterful deceptions?" Poirot's response carried the wisdom of someone who had witnessed the destruction of trust many times before. "Monsieur, the value of beauty lies not in its monetary worth or even its authenticity, but in the understanding it brings to those who appreciate it. Do not allow her crimes to rob you of your capacity for appreciation. That would be to grant her a victory she does not deserve." Mrs. Lydia Wren, shaken by the revelation that someone she had trusted completely had systematically betrayed that trust, channeled her distress into renewed charitable efforts. The Children's Festival in Bloomsbury, deprived of Darnley's promised support by his death, received an unexpected benefactor when she decided to fund the expansion herself. Young Hugh, meanwhile, accepted his uncle's offer of modest employment cataloguing the collection, work that was, as he observed, humiliating in its humility. "It is honest," Poirot replied gently. "One does not cure a bent sapling by gilding it, but by staking it until it can stand." The final reckoning. At the Old Bailey, the case proceeded with the inexorable certainty that Poirot's methodical investigation had made inevitable. Evidence of the forgery network, the financial trail, the specialized conservation wax, and the microscopic traces on the place card wove together into a net that even Miss Foyle's subtle mind could not escape. Her counsel argued her gifts and grievances. The jury heard her intelligence with respect and her contempt with distaste. The verdict, when it came, satisfied the law while leaving unsatisfied her nebulous claims on the sympathy of the wronged. A final letter arrived for Poirot after the trial, written in Miss Foyle's precise hand. It contained no apology, only a grudging acknowledgment. You have, I think, a true appreciation of exactitude. It is some consolation to have been mastered by a practitioner rather than a bungler. Even in defeat, she arranged the papers with characteristic precision, providing information that assisted in recovering additional stolen pieces. Philosophical conclusions. On the evening that truly closed the affair, Mrs. Wren hosted a modest gathering, not of the great and good, but of the small and steadfast. There was soup, then beef, then apple tart. Everyone ate. After the long austerity of suspicion, the simple, honest meal seemed a kind of absolution. As we took our leave, Mrs. Wren pressed Poirot's hand. "You have returned us to ourselves," she said, tears brightening her eyes. "That is the kindest restoration of all." In our cab returning to Whitehaven Mansions, I ventured a final reflection. There was something terrible in her, Poirot, and something admirable. The admirable was the discipline, he replied thoughtfully. The terrible was the purpose to which she put it. When order serves pride, it becomes tyranny. When it serves truth, it is justice. He settled against the cushions with satisfaction. "And you observe, Hastings, that at last the dinner was properly eaten." "How do you mean?" "At Wren House, on that first evening, one guest did not eat because a certain appetite, vanity, devoured him first. Tonight all ate because humbler appetites, gratitude, companionship, had their proper place. It is my philosophy that when the stomach and the conscience agree, the world is well arranged." As London's lamps pricked through the rising mist, I felt again that mingled comfort and awe that Poirot's presence always evoked. The case had ended not with triumphal horns, but with the restoration of order in a few square rooms and a handful of hearts. For Hercule Poirot, it was everything. Thus concludes the affair at the dinner guest who never ate. Justice has been served, the innocent vindicated, and order restored, though not without lasting scars. The invisible woman has been seen at last, but the price of that visibility echoes through the corridors of Wren House long after the great detective has departed to restore order to other disordered worlds. Spring had returned to London with its customary mixture of promise and renewal when the final threads of the Wren House affair were at last properly woven into place. The newspapers had moved on to fresher scandals, the courts had rendered their verdicts, and life had resumed its normal rhythms, though not without permanent alterations to the moral landscape of all who had been touched by Miss Beatrice Foyle's elaborate deceptions. I found Poirot in his sitting room on a particularly fine April morning, engaged in the meticulous arrangement of his correspondence. His breakfast lay finished with characteristic precision, every crumb accounted for, every utensil in its designated place. Since the conclusion of the case, I had noticed his almost ceremonial attention to the act of dining, as if the memory of Felix Darnley's interrupted meal had impressed upon him the significance of consumption completed and properly appreciated. "You are contemplating our recent adventure, mon ami," he observed, without looking up from his letters. "There is a particular quality to your silence when you revisit concluded cases. The silence of a man arranging memories like artifacts in a collection he wishes to understand more completely. The fates restored. Indeed, I had been reflecting upon the various participants in that deadly drama, and how their lives had rearranged themselves in the wake of revelation. Young Hugh Lessing had proven remarkably resilient, his brush with false accusation serving as the shock that redirected his dissolute energies toward constructive purposes. His work cataloguing Sir Ambrose's, Collection had revealed unexpected scholarly aptitudes, and he had recently been accepted to read history at Cambridge. His gambling debts finally cleared through honest labor rather than desperate schemes. The boy has learned the difference between appetite and hunger, Poirot had observed during our last visit to Wren House. Appetite is desire without discipline. It consumes without nourishing. Hunger, properly understood, seeks what will truly satisfy rather than what merely tempts. Sir Ambrose himself had weathered the betrayal with the philosophical resignation of a true collector. The authentication process had revealed that nearly a third of his treasures were reproductions, yet he had chosen to retain several of the forgeries alongside their recovered originals. They are beautiful in their own right, he had explained, and they serve as reminders that appearances, however convincing, must always be tested against truth. Mrs. Lydia Wren had found in charitable work the purpose that her elevated social position had never quite provided. The Children's Festival in Bloomsbury had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, funded not by the manipulative largesse of men like Felix Darnley, but by the genuine commitment of those who understood the difference between patronage and service. The return of the stolen. Our final visit to Wren House had been occasioned by a letter from Antwerp, where the recovered Louis XV snuff-box had been traced through the network of dealers and collectors that Miss Foyle had so expertly cultivated. Poirot insisted we deliver it personally, treating the occasion with the ceremony it deserved. Sir Ambrose received us in his library, thinner but steadier than when we had first met him. On the table lay a padded case. Beside it, documentation from auctioneers and insurers that would restore the piece to its proper place in the historical record. "One returns to you what is yours," Poirot announced with ceremonious care, opening the case to reveal the snuff-box with its Watteau panels gleaming softly in the afternoon light. It was recovered through the cooperation of those who, like yourself, value truth above possession. The chain of ownership has been properly documented, and its authenticity confirmed by the most rigorous methods. Sir Ambrose's hands trembled as he lifted the box, examining it with the wonder of a man reunited with something precious that he had feared lost forever. "I had wondered whether I would ever again trust my own eyes," he admitted quietly. "Perhaps I can." "Trust returns like the spring," Poirot replied gently. "Not at once, but inevitably, if one does not freeze it with fear." The philosophy of consumption. As we prepared to leave Wren House for the final time, I found myself thinking of that simple dinner of soup, beef, and apple tart that had followed the night of revelation, how everyone had eaten with gratitude, finding in the sharing of honest food something approaching, communion after the long ordeal of suspicion and deceit. "You know, Poirot," I ventured as our cab carried us back through the familiar streets, "I've been thinking about the title the papers gave this case, The Dinner Guest Who Never Ate. It strikes me as more profound than they perhaps intended." Poirot's eyes took on that familiar gleam of understanding. "Indeed, Hastings, on its surface, it refers to the unfortunate Mr. Darnley, whose final meal was interrupted by death. But consider, there was another guest at that table who never truly ate, though she sat among the diners for years. Miss Foyle. Précisément. She was surrounded by beauty, by culture, by the very things that should nourish the soul, yet she starved herself spiritually because she chose possession over appreciation, control over understanding. She could catalogue beauty, replicate it, even steal it, but she could never truly consume it in the way that brings genuine satisfaction." He paused, watching the London streets flow past our window. "And there was a third guest who was absent from that table, mon ami. One who should have been present at every place setting but was nowhere to be found." "Who?" "Conscience," Poirot replied with quiet certainty. "It had been banished from the room beforehand. Without it, Monsieur Darnley lost his appetite for anything but power and manipulation. Without it, Mademoiselle Foyle mistook cleverness for wisdom and hunger for justice. But observe how, when conscience returned, quietly, Like a proper guest arriving fashionably late, the subsequent meals at Wren House and the feast in Bloomsbury were both consumed with gratitude and shared with genuine joy. The invisible made visible. From Holloway Prison had come a series of letters, not to us, but to various museums and private collectors, providing detailed information about the location and current ownership of stolen pieces. Miss Foyle's cooperation was neither remorseful nor entirely altruistic. Rather, it seemed to spring from the same obsessive precision that had marked her criminal career. She cannot bear the thought of beautiful objects remaining lost, Poirot had observed. Even in defeat, she must impose order upon the chaos her crimes created. It is, perhaps, the closest thing to redemption such a mind can achieve. Not through repentance, but through the compulsive need to complete the catalogue of her own destruction. The authorities had found her assistance invaluable. Dozens of stolen pieces had been recovered and returned to their rightful owners, while the network of forgers and dealers she had cultivated was systematically dismantled. Her encyclopedic knowledge of the art underworld proved as valuable to law enforcement as it had once been to criminal enterprise. The final wisdom, as our cab drew up to Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot gathered his gloves and walking stick with characteristic precision. The afternoon light was fading, some unfamiliar comfort of routine beckoned. Tisane at the proper hour, correspondence arranged just so, the small rituals that imposed order upon an often chaotic world. The true crime, Hastings, he said as we prepared to part ways, was not the theft of objects or even the murder of Mr. Darnley, terrible though that was. The true crime was the corruption of gifts, intelligence, taste, knowledge that should have served beauty and truth, but instead served only pride and greed. He paused at the entrance to his building, his keen eyes reflecting the wisdom of someone who had seen enough of human folly to understand its patterns, yet retained enough faith in human nature to continue the work of restoration. Miss Foyle possessed everything necessary for a life of genuine achievement and contribution. What she lacked was the humility to serve something greater than herself. She wished to be seen, to be recognized, to be admired, but she confused visibility with value, recognition with respect. And in the end, mon ami, she achieved the visibility she craved, but at the cost of everything that might have made that visibility worthwhile. She became famous for her crimes rather than celebrated for her contributions, a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration. The proper conclusion. As I prepared to take my leave, Poirot offered one final observation, delivered with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had seen justice served and order restored. The dinner was eaten in the end, Hastings, perhaps not by the guest who was intended, but by those who remained. For life, it always finds a way to continue, even after the most tragic of meals. He adjusted his tie with characteristic precision and smiled with genuine warmth. And now, if you will excuse me, I believe it is time for my evening tisane. The little grey cells have worked hard today. They deserve their proper nourishment. With that, Hercule Poirot, with impeccable composure and a philosophical insight that cut to the very heart of the human condition, disappeared into the ordered sanctuary of Whitehaven Mansions. The door closed with a satisfying click, and I was left to ponder the intricate dance between appetite and satisfaction, between hunger and fulfillment, and the quiet triumph of those who choose to feast on truth rather than starve on deception. The affair at Wren House was truly concluded, but its lessons would endure as long as human beings gathered around tables to share not merely food, but the deeper hungers that define our humanity. In the end, everyone had eaten, some nourishing their bodies, others their souls, and a few, like Hercule Poirot himself, feeding that most essential appetite of all, the hunger for justice, truth, and the restoration of proper order to a disordered world.